June 1839. On a humid beach in Human, Commissioner Lin Zexu watches as 2.6 million pounds of raw opium are shoveled into massive pits filled with lime and salt. He offered a prayer to the god of the sea, apologizing for the pollution he was about to unleash, but he had no choice. This black mud was rotting his country from the inside out. 1 in every 4 men in the coastal provinces was an addict. The silver reserves of the Qing Dynasty were hemorrhaging into the pockets of the British East India Company. Lin thought he was saving China. In reality, he had just handed the British Empire the perfect excuse to launch the most morally bankrupt invasion in human history. Imagine the world's largest corporate entity acting as a state-sponsored drug cartel. The British didn't want territory. At least, not at first. They wanted tea. But the Chinese only accepted silver, and Britain was running out. Their solution? Systematically addicting the Chinese population to Indian opium to balance the books. When China finally fought back, they didn't just meet a navy, they met the Nemesis, an iron-hulled, steam-powered devil ship that could sail against the wind and tide, turning the Yangtze River into a graveyard of wooden junks. This is not just a story of tea and drugs, it is the story of how the world's oldest superpower was brought to its knees by the world's first industrial empire. How did a conflict over a forbidden narcotic lead to the theft of Hong Kong? Why did a Christian queen ignore the desperate personal pleas of the Chinese emperor to stop the trade? And how did the burning of the legendary Old Summer Palace create a century of humiliation that still dictates every move China makes in modern geopolitics? To understand why the world looks the way it does today, you have to understand the moment the first British cannon fired on the Pearl River. The consequences of these shots are still ringing out in the 21st century. To understand how this disaster unfolded, we have to look at a map of the world in the early 1800s. At one end, you had the British Empire, freshly fueled by the Industrial Revolution, expanding its grip on India and thirsting for global dominance. At the other, the Qing Dynasty, the Middle Kingdom, a civilization that had been the undisputed center of the Asian world for millennia. The British had a problem, and it was a surprisingly domestic one: tea. By the early 19th century, the British were drinking nearly 30 million pounds of tea a year. It was more than a beverage. It was the lifeblood of the empire's social fabric and a massive tax revenue machine that funded the Royal Navy. But the Chinese, under the restrictive Canton system, held all the cards. They only traded through one port, Guangzhou, and they only accepted one form of payment: cold, hard silver. For decades, the world's silver supply was being sucked into the vaults of the Forbidden City. The British East India Company was staring at a massive trade deficit that threatened to bankrupt the empire. They needed a commodity, something portable, something high demand, and something that would create its own market through sheer biological necessity. They found it in the poppy fields of Bengal. The British East India Company didn't just stumble into the drug trade, they engineered it with industrial precision. They monopolized opium production in India, processed it into high-grade Patna and Benares cakes, and then, to keep their hands clean, sold it to independent country traders who smuggled it into China. It was the ultimate corporate loophole. The company could tell Parliament they weren't technically breaking Chinese law, while their ships acted as floating warehouses of narcotics anchored just off the coast, waiting for local smugglers to ferry the black mud to shore. The impact on China was catastrophic. Imagine a modern nation where 10% of the population is suddenly hooked on a drug as potent as heroin. By the 1830s, opium dens were as common in Chinese cities as coffee shops are in New York today. It wasn't just the underclass either. High-ranking officials, soldiers, and even members of the imperial court were spending their days in a cloud of flower smoke. Productivity plummeted. The army became a ghost of its former self. Soldiers were reportedly so high they couldn't lift their spears, let alone defend a coastline. But the real heart attack for the Qing Empire was economic. Because opium had to be paid for in silver, the flow of currency reversed. For the first time in history, silver was leaving China faster than it was coming in. This caused the internal value of silver to skyrocket, effectively doubling or tripling the tax burden on peasants who earned their living in copper coins but had to pay taxes in silver. The social fabric of the world's most stable empire was tearing at the seams. This was the crisis Lin Zexu inherited. He didn't see a trade dispute. He saw a civilization-ending plague. He wrote a famous, heartbreaking letter to Queen Victoria, asking, "Suppose there were people from another country who carried opium for sale to England and seduced your people into buying and smoking it. Certainly, your honorable ruler would deeply detest it." History records that Victoria never even read it. To the British Free Trade lobby in London, Lin Zexu wasn't a hero protecting his people. He was a tyrant interfering with the natural right of British merchants to make a profit. But here is the part they don't teach you in the standard history books. We often view this as a clash of civilizations, the West versus the East. But the man who actually pushed the British Empire into this war wasn't a general or a king. It was a Scottish merchant named William Jardine, a man known by the Chinese as the Iron-Headed Rat. Jardine didn't just want to sell opium, he wanted to break China open. When Lin Zexu destroyed those 2.6 million pounds of opium in Human, he didn't just destroy a product. He gave Jardine the insult to the British flag he needed to lobby Parliament for a full-scale invasion. The British public was told this was a war for the honor of the crown and the liberty of trade. They were never told their sons were going to die to protect the profit margins of a global drug cartel. And yet, as the British fleet sailed toward the Pearl River, the greatest threat to the Qing Dynasty wasn't actually the British cannons. While the emperor was focused on the barbarians at the gate, a failed civil servant named Hong Shuquan was currently waking up from a fever dream in a small village, convinced that he was the literal younger brother of Jesus Christ. While Britain was preparing to attack from the outside, a holy war was about to ignite from the inside, one that would claim 20 million lives and make the Opium Wars look like a mere skirmish. The British fleet didn't just arrive. It materialized like a nightmare on the horizon of the Pearl River. 16 massive warships, 4 armed steamers, and transports carrying 4,000 elite troops. To the Qing observers, these were barbarian ships. Clunky, wooden, and surely no match for the divine protection of the Middle Kingdom. They were wrong. The first shots at the Battle of Chuanpi didn't just break the silence, they shattered an era. Within minutes, the British Royal Navy proved that the impenetrable Chinese junks were little more than floating kindling. The British 32-pounder guns outranged the Chinese cannons by miles. Chinese shells often bounced harmlessly off the thick oak hulls of British frigates, while British Congreve rockets turned the Chinese fleet into a series of floating bonfires. But this wasn't the payoff the British wanted. Winning a sea battle was easy. To force the emperor's hand, they needed to strike at the heart of the system. And they had a secret weapon that defied the laws of nature, the Nemesis. The Nemesis was the world's first iron-hulled, ocean-going steam warship. It was a terrifying hybrid of the Industrial Revolution. Because it had a flat bottom and was powered by coal, it didn't need the wind, it didn't need the tide. It could steam up shallow rivers where no deep-draft warship had ever dared to go. The Chinese called it the devil ship. It was a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. It could appear behind defensive lines, bypass coastal forts, and strike at the soft underbelly of the interior. Yet, even as his forts fell and his navy burned, the Daoguang Emperor remained defiant in the Forbidden City. He viewed the British as nothing more than sea pirates, annoying pests that would eventually run out of supplies and go home. He didn't realize he wasn't fighting a pirate crew. He was fighting a global logistics machine. The British strategy shifted from show of force to strangulation. They didn't want to conquer China's land. That was too expensive. They wanted to seize its money. They sailed north, bypassing the heavily defended ports, and aimed straight for the jugular, the Yangtze River and the Grand Canal. This was the intersection of China's entire economy. Every grain of rice destined for the capital in Beijing had to pass through this narrow corridor. By blockading the Grand Canal, the British didn't just stop trade, they started a famine. In the city of Zhenjiang, the reality of industrial war hit home with a brutality that shocked the world. The Qing's elite Manchu bannermen, realizing they couldn't defeat the British bayonets and steam-powered artillery, chose mass suicide over surrender. They killed their wives and children, and then themselves. The British soldiers, hardened by colonial wars in India, walked into a city of ghosts. The mini payoff was clear. The British had won every single engagement. They hadn't lost a single major ship. But the micro hook was more dangerous. How do you sign a peace treaty with a civilization that views you as a subhuman barbarian and would rather die than negotiate? The answer came in August 1842 on the deck of the HMS Cornwallis. This was the Treaty of Nanking, the first of what China would later call the unequal treaties. The terms were a total surrender. 1. China had to pay 21 million silver dollars, not for the war, but to compensate the British for the opium Lin Zexu had destroyed. 2. 5 treaty ports were open to British merchants, bypassing the Canton system entirely. 3. A barren rock of an island called Hong Kong was ceded to the British Crown in perpetuity. The British got their tea, they got their silver, and they got their drug market. But as the ink dried on the Treaty of Nanking, the British realized they had a new problem. The Qing government was so weakened, so humiliated, and so bankrupt from the war and the indemnity payments that it began to lose its grip on its own people. The century of humiliation didn't just start with the British invasion. It started with a domestic collapse. While the British were counting their silver, the heavenly king, Hong Xiuquan, was gathering an army of millions in the south. The Taiping Rebellion was erupting, fueled by the very poverty and social chaos the Opium War had created. The Qing Dynasty was now caught in a pincer. On one side, the most powerful industrial empires in the West. On the other, a messianic peasant uprising that was burning its way toward the capital. The British watched the chaos and saw an opportunity. They realized the Treaty of Nanking didn't go far enough. They wanted opium legalized. They wanted a British ambassador in the Forbidden City, a place no foreigner had ever been allowed to reside. They wanted to turn all of China into a giant, unregulated marketplace. They just needed a reason to start a second war, and in 1856 they found it in a small cargo ship called the Arrow. The British claimed the Chinese had insulted the British flag on the Arrow. It was a flimsy excuse, almost certainly fabricated, but it was enough. The Second Opium War, also known as the Arrow War, wasn't just a British affair. This time, the French joined in, eager for their own slice of the Chinese pie. If the First Opium War was about trade, the Second Opium War was about total submission. This time, the devil ships weren't just staying on the coast. They were heading for Beijing, and as the Anglo-French Expeditionary Force marched toward the capital, they came across something the West had only heard of in legends: the Yuan, the old summer palace. A 800-acre wonderland of palaces, gardens, and thousands of years of Chinese art and history. What happened next would become the single most traumatizing event in modern Chinese memory. It wasn't just a battle. It was a systematic attempt to erase the soul of a civilization, and the man leading the charge, Lord Elgin, the son of the man who had famously stripped the Parthenon of its marbles. The decision he made at the gates of the Summer Palace would ensure that China would never, ever trust the West again. The smoke rising from the old Summer Palace in October 1860 was visible for miles, a black shroud that signaled the definitive end of the old world. For 3 days, 3,500 British and French troops systematically torched the Garden of Perfect Brightness. They didn't just loot the gold and the silks. They smashed the mechanical clocks, shredded the ancient scrolls, and leveled the architecture that had taken centuries to build. Lord Elgin, the man who ordered the fire, did it with cold, calculated intent. He didn't want to burn Beijing. That would be politically messy. He wanted to strike the emperor where it hurt most: his private sanctuary, his pride, and his connection to his ancestors. It was a message written in ash. Your civilization is no longer sacred. Our cannons are your new gods. This is the answer to the question of why Queen Victoria never replied to the emperor's desperate plea. To the British leadership, the moral argument was irrelevant because the hierarchy of the world had already been decided by steam and iron. In their eyes, China wasn't a peer. It was an obstacle to the natural law of global commerce. They didn't see themselves as drug dealers. They saw themselves as the vanguard of a new industrial reality where free trade was a divine right that superseded the sovereignty of any king or emperor. The century of humiliation was now in full swing. By the time the fires at the Summer Palace died down, the Qing Dynasty had been forced to sign the Convention of Peking. Opium was finally officially legalized. The trade that Lin Zexu had tried to drown in lime and salt was now the law of the land. The British didn't just get their silver back, they got an entire nation hooked on their product, ensuring a steady flow of wealth from the pockets of Chinese peasants into the coffers of London for decades to come. But the true resolution of this story isn't found in the 19th century. It's found in the way China remembers it today. When the British took Hong Kong, they saw it as a barren rock that would serve as a permanent warehouse for their global cartel. To the Chinese, it became a 155-year-old scar, a constant daily reminder of the moment they lost control of their own destiny. When Hong Kong was finally handed back in 1997, the Chinese government didn't just see it as a territorial gain, they saw it as the first major step in healing a wound that had been festering since 1839. The open loops of the Opium Wars are still being closed in our modern headlines. When you see China building artificial islands in the South China Sea, or asserting dominance over global trade routes, or taking a hardline stance against Western interference, you are seeing the direct psychological inheritance of the Nemesis sailing up the Yangtze. The collective memory of the Devil Ship and the burning palace has been forged into a national mantra: never again. China's current obsession with Great Rejuvenation is not just a political slogan, it is a response to the Black Mud. It is a reaction to the moment a corporate entity backed by a Royal Navy decided that profit was worth more than the lives of millions. The Opium Wars taught China a brutal lesson that they have never forgotten. In a world governed by industrial power, you are either the one writing the treaties or the one being erased by them. The tragedy of Lin Zexu was that he was a moral man, playing a game where the rules had already changed. He believed in the power of an appeal to a queen's conscience. He didn't realize that Victoria was merely the figurehead of a machine that had no conscience, only a balance sheet. The British Empire didn't win because they were more civilized. They won because they were the first to marry the laboratory to the battlefield, turning chemistry into a narcotic and steam into a weapon. As the 21st century unfolds, the echoes of those first British cannons on the Pearl River are louder than ever. The world's oldest superpower has finally stood back up, and it is carrying the blueprints of its own humiliation as a roadmap for its future. The Opium Wars didn't just change the map of Asia. They created a version of China that is determined to ensure that no devil ship will ever threaten its shores again. The fire that Lord Elgin started in 1860 never truly went out. It simply migrated into the heart of a modern superpower, fueled by a century of memory and a drive for total self-reliance. To look at modern China is to look at a civilization shaped by the very forces that once tried to dismantle it. The tragedy of the Opium Wars isn't just that they happened, but that they established a brutal precedent for how global power operates, often hiding the calculated pursuit of profit behind the high-minded veneer of progress or civilization. We are living in an era where history is accelerating, where the shadows of 1860 are lengthening across the Pacific, and where the next devil ship might not be made of iron and steam, but of silicon, sea lanes, and sovereign debt. To navigate a world this volatile, you cannot rely on surface-level headlines. You have to understand the machinery beneath. The forces that drove William Jardine to lobby for war and led Lord Elgin to torch a palace are the same forces that dictate the geopolitical chess match of the 21st century. They are the invisible threads of history that still pull the levers of modern power, and failing to see them means being blind to the future. Every week, we dismantle these historical crossroads, the moments where a single decision, a forgotten letter, or a calculated spark change the trajectory of human civilization. If you believe that a deep, unflinching understanding of our past is the only lens through which we can accurately view our future, then you belong in this community. We are building a comprehensive archive of these power dynamics, uncovering the mechanics of how empires rise, how they lose their souls, and how they eventually reinvent themselves from the ashes of their own humiliation. To ensure you are here when we uncover the next piece of the puzzle, where we will explore how these patterns of 19th century industrial warfare are manifesting in the technological Cold Wars of today, join us as we go deeper. The story of power never truly ends. It only changes its face. Let's find out what that face looks like together. Click into our next investigation to see the patterns continue,